Bo and Luke Nation, welcome to another episode of the Bo and Luke Show. Today, we are honored to have Ovell Barbee with us. Ovel is Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, Spectrum Health, which is a $5 billion not-for-profit integrated health system based in West Michigan. Ovel is responsible for leading Spectrum Health's compensation and employee relations teams, diversity. He's the human resources partner for Spectrum Health Hospital Group. And in this capacity, he leverages human resources to support hospital operations. In the past, he has held HR leadership positions at Blue Cross Blue Shield, Motorola, OnStar, General Motors, and Canadian National Railway. He has developed and led human resources initiatives in complex and diverse industries and has provided direct support to employee populations as large as 16,000 and has led teams of direct reports as large as 50. Ovel, it's very rare that I get to introduce somebody with that much in the background. So congratulations. I hope I didn't mess any of that up, but welcome to the show. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Luke. And Bo, I'm excited to participate in the Bo and Luke show today.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Why don't you tell, Luke did a good job, but let's have you do a great job and tell our listeners about yourself in your words.
So, as Luke mentioned, I currently work as the Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Chief Diversity Officer at Spectrum Health, which is a Michigan-based health system. We have more than 14 hospitals, and we also have about 31,000 employees. The Chief Diversity role was added. I'm mostly a human resource professional, but I have a passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. With the appointment of a new CEO, I was asked would I be interested in assuming coverage of a newly named chief diversity role for our organization.
Awesome.
And was this a passion of yours to begin with? Was it an excitement thing? Was it nervous? Tell me about, what that feeling was like when you took that role over.
I would say that people around me had already made the assumption that I was the diversity officer because, like a lot of organizations, there's not a lot of visible diversity amongst senior leadership teams.
Sure.
And I was always the person pushing the envelope, talking about the diverse perspectives that were lacking in the discussions. And so I think it was a natural alignment with personal interest of mine. And I would say I've always been the advocate for the underdog, even when I was a young tyke growing up in Grand Rapids.
Really?
Yes.
That's fantastic. Do you have any stories about helping out the underdogs?
I would say a story that comes to mind is I was lobbying to become senior class president in high school. And my campaign included all the various populations, the popular kids, the not so popular, athletes, non-athletes, etc. And I was successful in becoming senior class president.
Nice.
On my platform.
Congratulations. That's a big win.
Yeah.
That's a huge one.
I think that's a huge win. So since we're back in high school, Ovel, you, in your background, you started work at a very young age. 12 years old, if I'm correct. How did that come about, and what was that journey? Please tell us about that journey and what that was like.
Well, I would say for me at 12 years old, I wanted a level of independence.
Really?
And, growing up in a divorced household and seeing the challenges that, my mother faced as a single parent, going back to school, furthering her education, I felt it was important for me as a member of the household to make a contribution.
Really?
And also the fact that I wanted to not have restrictions in terms of my school attire, etc. I took a traditional path and became a newspaper carrier at the age of 12.
Nice.
I tell people now that I haven't stopped working since that young age of 12.
Yeah. That reminds me, Luke, Ovel, we had a guest back in season 2, I think a second or third episode, Brandon Paulson. I think that was his name. He was the youngest, at the age of 19, became the youngest elected mayor in a city in the state of Maryland. Now he's in his second term, but he how, I mean, it was just amazing that at us, even before 19, way before, like he was 10 or 11, he was already like, I want to work in my community. I want to serve my community. And he started sitting in like your local city council meetings as a kid. That's fascinating to me.
Kind of
Yeah.
starts a, a foundation in terms
Yeah.
of, things that might be specific to who you are as an individual, part of your
Hmm.
DNA.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how those early experiences translate to how you show up as an adult many
Hmm.
years later.
Yeah. 100%.
Is there anything you think you learned at a young age that you still take with you or do today?
Great question. I would say it helped me really manage time, so time management,
Hmm.
because, I always had to balance my academic studies, finding time for my job, and being able to, play in those multiple camps. I
Hmm.
think it gives you a little more tenacity. So, for example, when I went to college, I ended up finding a job with close proximity to campus, and I replaced a full time employee, and I worked 15 to 20 hours a week at the job. So I'm sure the owners were happy that they saved a little money in terms of salary, but I appreciated the proximity to the campus, et cetera. And I just, was very focused on cranking out work.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
huge.
That's huge.
That's
It
absolutely
is huge.
huge. And you're probably
Yeah.
still doing it today, right?
Oh yeah, in terms
Yeah.
of like the hours, I think that as your career grows, you may not understand the breadth of what the leaders sign up for. But I remember being in an individual contributor role and wondering, what do the managers really do? And it's interesting. It gives you a different perspective as you ascend the various levels of leadership within a corporate environment, because your responsibilities just continue to grow, as do the expectations that the organization has on you as a leader in the organization. I see that not only from an HR lens, as the function that I represent, but also as a leader in corporate America.
Hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. I was really excited to ask you this question. I'm excited for your answer. What do you think is more important to have, goals or systems to reach those goals?
I had a clue that you might be asking me that question, Luke, and I would say that my answer is the systems, because in my world, wearing the diversity hat, we look at a fair amount of data to help us decide what we're going to do to address disparate outcomes.
Hmm.
And how we are more successful leads to more criticisms about us. And I'll explain what that means. Meaning, people want change to occur immediately, overnight. But as you start having a conversation about systems like policies, processes, procedures, once you change those components that lead to disparate outcomes, the results take a longer amount of time to realize.
Hmm.
But that's exactly where you need to go with recommendations to reduce or eliminate disparate outcomes. You really have to have the conversation about systems. So, goals are helpful, but unless you fix the systems, you're not going to be successful.
Hmm.
I 100% agree with you. And I think it breaks it down little chunks because it can be, I don't know, at least in my experience, if you have just a big goal, it's easy to get discouraged and get off the path. But if you have a system, you can kind of win for that day and just, win one small baby step at a time. And then, and if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, like all hitting a goal is just putting together a bunch of little steps.
Mhm. No,
Yeah.
I agree in terms of, your course of action or your plan.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Bo, in the military, did they I'm sure that's all they preached, right?
Systems.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, no, it's systems are super important. And we talk about that quite a bit on the show. And it's an overarching overall, it's the commonality amongst whether it's entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, but even those who have really been through the ups and downs, um, where you feel like you're hitting rock bottom, whether your company or your career, but then you bounce out of that, and a lot of that can be attributed back to systems that you put in place, and then you execute against that system the best you can each day. So you're executing intent, and then you start adding those days up, and you get to the results that you are, or you exceed the results that you're looking for. So yeah, I love that. It's a great answer. I think you hit it right on what I would have expected. So that's great. And for everybody listening, you've heard that from 50 plus guests, that you should probably, take heed of what our guests are saying, because they've been there, done that. They've been in the trenches. They've risen to the top of their game, and it's not because they didn't put in all the hard work, and put those systems in place to get there. So yeah, awesome, spot on, Luke.
Yeah. Ovel, I have a chief diversity officer question for you that I'm excited to ask. So I talk to HR leaders, on a daily basis. And over the past year, diversity has been a very hot topic amongst organizations, right? Now, what I'm finding whenever I talk to people is that organizations are at different maturity levels when it comes to their diversity and equity plans, right? You look at a company like Spectrum, even appointing you in that position automatically means they're focusing on it and they're at a different maturity level, but it just runs, pun intended, a big spectrum uh, of folks that are either starting to do it and they're just now newly on that path. Uh, what would you say that small or large companies can do, um, to promote this and to actually start their own system of doing this? And I'll let you take that wherever you want to go.
No, I think it's a great question, one that I have been asked a lot, especially in light of what we saw this past year with the, very visible social injustices being in the midst of an ongoing pandemic. And, our organization, I will just highlight Spectrum, and I will answer the question, I promise, Luke. Um, Spectrum as an organization is like a lot of organizations where as you start having conversations about words like racism, discrimination, harassment, bullying, the room can go silent.
Sure.
And in fact, people ask me in other forums, Ovell, what's the most significant challenge you face as a DE and I leader? And my answer is
Wow.
silence. And it's interesting how last year forced organizations to have more dialogue about those very topics. And it's interesting because you have employees saying, we don't expect our employer to solve all of society's ills, but we do have this basic expectation that someone is going to ask us, how are we doing? And that someone is going to wait and listen to our answer. That's
Mhm.
basically what we heard from our employees. So we rallied around the time period of the George Floyd video, and we had a day of understanding, and it pushed us as an organization to a next level of conversation because for the first time we really felt a little more comfortable having conversations about racism. So for smaller organizations or any size organization that is really just getting started, and we can put that aside and say, why are you just getting started, in this calendar year of 2021? But nevertheless, I appreciate them getting started. But what I say to those organizations is decide on your why. Why in quotes. Why are you doing this? It shouldn't be my job as a person who works in this field to convince you. You should determine that so that then you can orchestrate a plan. And diversity is indeed like um, an organization that goes through maturation,
Mhm.
startup, growth, becoming a mature. There's several DE and I models that show you the same thing about DE and I practices. So you don't want to try to skip steps because your efforts will be unsuccessful. But as you review the items compliance? Are you doing X, Y, or Z? And your answer is yes. You should be pushing your organization to get to the next level.
Mhm.
Which over time, would you even need DE&I practitioners? Where
No.
it becomes like the back of your hand and
Yeah.
all the leaders are inclusive leaders and you've got great outcomes because you have the best ideas, the best solutions, the best cultures. That would be ideal state.
Yeah. And I tell you what, Ovell, Luke and I had this conversation, what, 2 weeks ago, where we were talking about, and this was outside of a guest, just him and I, we were talking about uh, diversity. And I said, Luke, I said, from my perspective, it's not until you get to the ideal state, when you've kind of made it. And then you don't even need to do it anymore. You don't really need to have official programs any longer. And I said, now him and I, we've been in the corporate world, we're experienced, and we look at our podcast as an example. Um, we're a top 2.5% podcast globally, and we put all of our guests out on our website and what season and who they are and where in their background and what they came from. I said, just go take a look. We're at that point, we make zero effort, and I would say zero purposeful effort to be diverse, but we are incredibly diverse. And what we do, the stories we bring, the people we have on the show, we don't have a plan to go out and seek a diverse group of people. It just happens because I think that's where we've both evolved to in life through our past experiences. So now we're delivering this podcast on this platform. And I think you just end up, I love that, because you just end up attracting and you're just doing it because it's natural. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does in terms of the evolution
The
or
evolution.
the desired state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a DE&I practitioner, which I
Uh-huh.
like saying that because it sounds very formal, now having the conversation about eliminating racism,
Mm-hmm.
it could make the work even, more daunting in terms of, when will we reach that in
Yeah.
terms of total elimination, something that has been in place since basically the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Do you think
Yeah.
it'll
You're
happen?
absolutely right.
Do you think
I
it'll
think
happen?
I think it could happen. I'm not sure that we will see it happen because you're talking about a concept or a premise that has been years in the making, influenced by multiple generations, etc.
Mm.
So how do you fix the systems
Mm-hmm.
that lead to this occurring?
Yeah.
That's where everyone has to rally and say, we've had enough. Now let's have definitive actions
Mm-hmm.
that demonstrate that we're serious.
Yeah. I had a great conversation yesterday morning. The studio that does all the sound engineering for our podcast, the owner of the studio, uh, Deshaun Scott, he's an African American. He and I are good friends, and we met and had coffee and stuff yesterday morning. We're talking about things, prepping for season 3 and so forth. And he owns a local marketing business as a whole here in the state of Ohio, and we were talking about some proposals that he did, right, and these designations that he has as a minority owned Black business in the state of Ohio. And then he had another business partner, and he's like, my gosh, I hate all these titles that they're giving me, right, for being micro, small, minority. I mean, and it's all government titles that they're giving and putting on your business. And I said, and I offered up to him, I said, Deshaun, from my perspective, because it happens, because even if you think of veterans as a protected class, you have service disabled, veteran owned small business, and it makes it sound like you're getting this status and it's going to help you, but you have incredible limits placed on you as a company. You can only do so much. You can only make so much revenue, or they're going to take that status away from you. So I said, if people really wanted to have this conversation, and when you talk about systemic racism, we have all these programs that seem to be ones that want to help, but in reality, they're really, in my personal opinion, they place limits. Why do we have the limits, right? If you're going to get a designation as a Black owned business, and or even like an 8A business, as soon as you hit a certain revenue threshold, they don't want to help you anymore. They don't want to from a company perspective. So it almost in my mind feels like you're right. It could happen, but there is a lot of work at that system level, even in the government legislative level, that really has to be looked at with purpose and intent to what is it that we are actually doing based on things that were put in place decades ago, literally.
Yeah, multiple prongs to the systems. You reference some, and also limitations and barriers.
Yeah,
And that's where the discussion, should focus in terms of why is that? And when you pose those questions, you could be met with silence also, because a
yeah,
lot of times people don't have an answer, or they think of an answer that they may not want to verbalize.
right. Very well
You
put.
and you might not this might not even be a question, I guess. I'm not looking for an answer for it, but it seems to me like it's a problem that we're all trying to solve. But why is it that I feel like a lot of this burden is being put on corporate America to do something about it? And I get why it's so important to have it in the workforce and by any employer. And maybe I'm totally wrong, but it seems like corporate America has an abnormal amount of expectations put on them to solve this, and that, I don't know, other divisions, government, things like that just don't have to do as much. Is anybody else feeling that? Feel free to call me crazy.
Well, I think there's probably debates on both sides of that, but I would say a corporation is an entity which is made up of, members of the community, ideal
Absolutely.
state. And so then you have public versus private, and, federal contractors, et cetera, and the requirements that are placed on or organizations. But this whole premise of good stewardship is one that, multiple generations are embracing. At
Mhm,
our organization, we're talking about what's the expectation of the employer to respond to newsworthy events.
mhm,
A
Mm,
statement from the CEO, George Floyd video, Capitol riots, the horrific shootings of Asian Americans, the
mhm,
list goes on. And you have a fair number of employees and prospective candidates who say, I want to work for an organization that has a social conscience.
mm-hmm.
Now, was this the case a few years ago? Probably not. But as you start going down the path of what's changed, is you can offer up technology, the exchange of information so fast, etc. Social media as a component, as an employer, Glassdoor, you want to review what people are saying about your organization, etc.
mhm,
So the whole premise of employer brand is something that is very important.
mhm.
I agree. It's like a community within a community
Yeah,
Yes.
100%.
corporation. I really want to get into some personal questions for you, Ovel. I want to know, and I love this question. What do you want your legacy to be? When somebody says Ovell Barbie, what do you want them to think of? What do you want your legacy to be once it's all said and done? Or you're retired in a lake or something.
Well, I actually have given thought to that. So I had a milestone birthday. I won't say which one, but it was more than a decade ago, where I was really focused on work. You asked about the demands, and I was working for a global organization. We had locations across the world, like every time zone. So people very close to me, they know that since 12 years old, I've always been a hardworking person. So I would be up on conference calls at 5 a.m. I'd go to the office, and if you dare left before 6 p.m., someone would say, "Oh, you're a short timer." And in that environment, you could
Mm,
have subsequent conference calls 8 p.m., 10 p.m. to, talk with people in Australia, etc. And I think that work demands they were taking its toll on me. And people around me were like, "Oh, Bill, when do you sleep?"
mhm,
It's like not a lot. And so after a period of reflection, I said, if something were to happen to me as a leader, as an individual, what would people say about me? And it drives you toward the question that I think all of us should think about, is how are you going to be remembered?
Mhm.
mhm,
And if I were answering that question and I was the author, and I only want to be the author for me personally, I would have said he had a great career. one of the youngest, executives at GM and human resources, blah, blah, blah. And I wouldn't have wanted to be remembered for any of that.
Yeah.
And so once I reconciled that in terms of me wanting to be the answer to that question, then I said, I need to start thinking about how I'm going to be remembered. So you've learned that I worked since I was 12 years old. Growing up in Grand Rapids, I had a lot of community outreach assisting me in my pursuit of my higher education. And what I decided to do around that big milestone birthday is pay back all of my nonprofit scholarship money. I signed up for my very first marathon, and I used the marathon to solicit, donations per mile, and I paid off one. And then I said, I'm also going to have my own legacy. I'm going to
Mhm.
have the Barbie book club, and I'm going to choose students from my hometown, the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, who have a compelling story to me.
Mhm.
And I'm going to agree to cover their books and supplies for 4 years of college. Now, with some parameters, my
Yeah.
parameter is, hey, I want you to remember this kind gesture, and I want you to be willing to do this for someone in the future. So I call those students my Barbie book
I
club
love that.
members, and
Mhm.
and that brings me a lot of personal satisfaction. It's my investment, a similar investment that others made in me. I'm doing that for other individuals. That's how I would want to be remembered, my legacy.
I think that's great. So
That's amazing.
let me get. So you went back and paid your
Everyone, every
and those
nonprofit
were
scholarship.
scholarships. So
Yeah,
you
scholarships.
had it wasn't a debt.
Correct.
You had no formal legal obligation to pay them back,
Correct.
but you
Correct.
went and did as pure gratitude for the opportunity, I would imagine.
Yes, I paid back every nonprofit scholarship. And
That's
it's
amazing.
interesting when I would call people, they'd say, you want to do what? I want to pay back the scholarship and maybe give you a little more.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, I found a speech that I wrote for one of the organizations that had given me a scholarship, and it was called Embracing Change. And they were so appreciative of the fact that I contacted them back to pay the money back. They said, "Well, we'd like you to be the keynote speaker at our, annual event."
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. That is definitely legacy building.
Yeah, I bet their jaws were on the floor. These folks, you
Yep.
know, that's
Yep.
incredible, Ovell. That's great. Let's see. I was really curious to this. Was there anything that sticks out in your mind that was super impactful that somebody taught you at any point in your life?
Yes. So I chuckle because I had a boss that I don't think I appreciated them as much when I worked for them as I do now. And I'm purposely being, gender neutral. So I won't say who the person is because they may think that I really like them a lot when I report it to them. But this individual basically said to me, she basically said, "You're not bringing your whole self to work. There's a toughness about you based upon your childhood, etc., that I see, but I don't see you showing up in that manner." She basically said, "Every time I see you, you're all poised and polished, Mr. Professional." And she said, "Corporate America is not going to be kind to you as a nice person." And she said, "What is the worst thing that can happen to you at work?" And I said, "I could be fired." And she said, "Well, what would you do then?" I said, "I'd pick myself off the ground, dust myself off. My spiritual side says I'd be okay. And I'd take my U of M degree and
Mhm.
the Spartan one and find another job." And she said, "For you to be the most effective leader you can be, you have to be okay with the worst possible outcome." And I said, so if I end up showing up in the manner similar to how I grew up in a, tougher neighborhood, etc., what are you going to say if someone calls you to complain? She said, "I'm going to say, Ovell, Ovell Barbee, you must have really irritated him." She basically gave me permission to challenge the status quo, to express my opinion, to be able to look in the mirror that was a game changer for me because I think I was a little more cautious. And I tell people that as I got older chronologically and had more leadership experience, her giving me permission at the time, it really was a catalyst for me being able to engage in the types of conversations that I'm engaged in now.
Wow, that's a
Are
great
you
lesson.
okay with the worst possible outcome? Because you're restricting yourself. And if you say, you're okay with being fired,
Yeah.
are you going to be able to look in the mirror? That's important to me.
Yeah, I think that's great. Man, this is all awesome stuff because there's so many, after 26 years in the Army and time in combat, that same type of thing for even for military leaders, right? Especially going into the battlefield, you really have to be okay the decisions that you make with the worst possible outcome, which could be people getting killed, right?
Hmm.
Um, you can't not be okay with that, or you were not going to be an effective leader, um, and actually trying to prevent that from happening, or do your best to lead your teams, give them the resources and be there and make sure those worst possible outcomes hopefully don't happen. That's phenomenal. I yeah, wow.
We put it that way, but being fired doesn't seem so bad.
No, but it's the even Luke and Ovell, what I do in my work today is helping, um, really helping HR leaders and all the training that we do and leadership development and programs that we have is really help those young, not just young, but Ovell, you're in a big company, right? But most companies in America are small business, under 500 employees. Those HR departments, as you're very well aware, one, two, maybe three people if you've got 500 employees. Not a lot of staff, and a lot of burdens get placed on HR. A lot of things get thrown into HR if they don't belong in some other department, and you're expected to learn how to know how to fix these things. I was literally talking to a young lady in Texas a couple of weeks ago. She's in her very first HR role. You could call her manager. They didn't give her that title, but she's all by herself in this company that works in multiple states. And the CEO throws, "Hey, we need a management training program. I need you to do that." She's like 27 years old. And in her first like corporate role outside of not having another HR support level above her other than the CEO, it's like, that is a huge burden that just got placed in her lap with no experience, no background, no leadership development. And she's like, I don't even know the first step to take. Right. I don't know where I was going with all that, but there's a lot of, it's great
We
stuff.
we
Ovel.
call that a stretch assignment, and for a
Yeah.
person who's bright, um, learning agile, we hope that we give them the tools and resources, and we feel like they would be successful with an
Yeah.
assignment like that. All the tension of accepting it.
Yeah. Inside of your company today, it's a stretch assignment. That's what you're saying, or
Well,
just
like in
industry as
HR,
a whole.
a stretch
Yeah.
assignment because she had no experience doing that,
Yeah.
task in the past,
Right.
but clearly they felt like she could deliver. There was a confidence level in her.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's all fascinating to me.
I
Anyways,
love to
Luke,
be able to
go
put
ahead.
a name to that. I love put stretch assignment. I
Stretch
like
assignment.
that. I like
You're
that.
being
I'm gonna
stretched. You're being stretched. All right.
yeah, I'm gonna use that. I feel like I have a lot of those like in my marriage, right?
HR, yeah, we use terms like that, stretch assignment.
Yeah.
I like that. That's how I feel about yard work at my new house. It's like that's a stretch assignment for me. I don't really know what I'm doing.
Good stuff.
Ovel, what so you mentioned you worked a ton, right? What do you have any routines, battle rhythms that you just do to keep your sanity, right? Because as you're saying, like, hey, I don't sleep a lot at that point in time. What do you do? How can people be more like Ovel? What works for you?
So it is interesting with the stressors of my two jobs, HR and diversity. I am a fitness person. I was a track guy in high school, and now I'm a slow jogger. I mentioned that I, successfully completed a marathon, actually two. So part of
Congrats.
my daily routine is fitness related activities, getting a workout in early morning. I'm still a early riser, and I'm also a foodie. As I start
Mm.
laughing because people tell me, oh, well, the reason why you run is because you use restaurants to give directions. You're a foodie. And I'm like, actually, I am. So that I would say that those two areas summarize my activity. Although working in this pandemic, my time actually sitting greatly increased per day. So I had to get a handle on that and find time for standing or walking.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. I sit all day long. It's not good, but I have been better about exercising.
I had to buy a standing desk. Like I'm standing right now. So the desks that go up and down, I had to do it. And you just, because you're right, too much sitting.
Well, and someone gave me a recommendation. I have an exercise ball nearby.
Oh, that's
it's kind of like the cheaters version of doing sit-ups, isolating your core.
Yeah, good stuff.
Oh, that'll work. Absolutely.
For sure.
I prefer doing them on one of those balls.
As long as you can sit still.
Yep.
Oh, that's right. I've had it pop out from under me a couple times and it didn't feel good. Ovell, I'm going to ask, I have one more question that I know the listeners are dying to hear about your background. So the Wolverines play the Spartans. Who are you rooting for?
My gosh, Luke. So I went undergrad at University of Michigan, master's #1 from U of M. And I tell people that when I enrolled at Michigan State, I enrolled under a different name. So make no mistake, I am Go Blue, a diehard Wolverine. And I understand that this may show on a video, so this is always nearby. I root for the Wolverines.
Yay.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
Go Blue all the way.
Go
Love
Blue.
it.
Well, Ovell, this has been an amazing time. We always ask our guests to take us out. So what we'd like to do is here at the end, if you want to promote anything, if you want to give any shout outs towards anything, if you want to talk about the Barbie book club, whatever you want, this is your floor. But then at the end, you just got to go, that's a wrap.
Okay. No, I appreciate that opportunity. I think that if the listeners or viewers are inspired by the concept of the Barbie book club, then it is important for us as individuals to do something. So if we reflect upon last year, the George Floyd videos, and the list goes on with what we saw, there was a number of people that reached out to me to say, hey, Ovel, what can I do to assist your efforts? And I appreciated every person who contacted me. But it does lead me to a but statement, because then you would start to wonder, what does it take for us to realize as individuals, as citizens, that other people may be having challenges? It shouldn't take a horrific video watching someone shout, I can't breathe, in front of our faces before we realize that someone has challenges. We should be more aware. And it's so interesting that all this occurred during the year 2020, perfect vision. So many of us were walking around with our eyes closed. And if that became the catalyst to spur you to action, I say great. But hopefully it doesn't take something of that gravity for others to realize that you can outreach and make a difference in the life of someone else. So I'm taking us out with that statement. Use your voice, pay attention to your surroundings, keep your eyes open. Thank you.
Tune in for a new episode every Thursday. You can subscribe to our email newsletter for information on upcoming guests, giveaways, and more. Rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to our sponsor, Sound United, for quality broadcast audio throughout Season 2.